This is a video response to BlitheringGenius. I became aware of him when he commented on my video Why Traditionalism Fails. He said this:
in the long run, traditionalism is guaranteed to win, because it reproduces genes and culture. That force is a lot more powerful than any social movement. Societies that reject biological reality will simply be swept away by evolution.
I then said, actually traditionalism is currently dead, and yet the population is still growing. Furthermore, humans are amazingly adaptable creatures. I doubt women being expected to pull their own weight will lead to extinction.
The population is only growing in those parts of the world that still have traditional arrangements between the sexes. In the West, the population is only growing by immigration. Fertility rates are far below replacement. Stats, video link. Adaptation works by replacing what fails with what succeeds. That is happening.
I watched his videos and told him I was going to make a video response. He said something along the lines of "Glad I inspired you. Looking forward to it." Well, I checked out his videos. He seems to be a traditionalist rocking mystery type, an anti-feminist MRA. I agree with about half of what he says in his videos. His videos are well thought out and scripted, which beats the hell out of videos of people who turn on a webcam and spend 20 minutes rambling about the way a subject makes them feel. He was respectful to me, so I will be respectful to him. Before I get to tackling his video about the sexual revolution, I want to tackle a few things in his video The Sexual Contract.
The explicit justification for feminism is that men oppress women. This claim is false. Men as a class cannot oppress women as a class. Individual men or groups of men can oppress individual women or groups of women, and vice versa, but the entire class of men simply cannot oppress the entire class of women. Men and women are codependent, and power will always be distributed equally between the sexes by the dynamics of that codependency.
Actually, men can oppress women, women can oppress men. It is believable that there was a time in US history where women could be considered oppressed by men. Today I proclaim men are oppressed by women. Let me put it to you like this: if a woman wants to go to college, but all colleges say we don't accept females, that is oppressive. If a man wants to get a job in daycare but they tell him we don't hire males, then that is oppressive. Anytime one group of people get a handout and another people don't, or are restricted from doing something, all because of their biology, that is oppression. And if you would like to argue that handouts and restrictions are not applied by males onto females or vice versa, that it's done by the government, then I would remind you that in a democracy, republic, the government does what it does on behalf of the people. So if women were forbidden to go to school, it might be the government that enforces the law, but they are doing it on behalf of the men. It's a bit like every group of people, be it biologically defined, behaviorally, or ideologically defined, is attempting to restrict and control other groups of people, and the government is merely the proxy. I can't reach into your pocket and take by force the money I need to buy food this week, but I can vote for politicians to enact welfare laws which pull money out of your paycheck to give to me. Again, groups of people controlling groups of people, the government is the proxy. Your proclamation that men and women require fucking each other to perpetuate the species, thus both men and women have never, are not, nor ever could, be socially or legally advantaged over the other, is complete rubbish. Let's just skip to the end of the video so I can argue your conclusion.
Conclusion. As human beings, we need to understand that there is nothing immoral or unfair about the sexual contract. The sexual contract benefits both sexes equally, but in different ways.
This is the important part, and this argument was used twice in your video critiquing Stardusk's metaphors. You cited that Stardusk is recognizing the value of a man's labor but not the value of a woman's sexual labor, so I will be killing many arguments with one stone. The assertion that a man working all day long to support his lazy stay-at-home wife is somehow equal to a woman spreading her legs is just pure nonsense. In order for it to be equal, you'd have to show me that the wife hates having sex with her husband as much as the husband hates going to work from 9 to 5 every day for the majority of his life. Not only is a wife spreading her legs not the same degree of sacrifice, it isn't even a sacrifice. Women like sex. Hell, women love sex. You can't tell me that when a man comes home exhausted from the physical brutality of his job, or the emotional stress of his job, that when he fucks his wife and gives her a powerful orgasm, and she lays there exhausted from the ecstasy, in post-orgasm, she has really sacrificed anything. Nor are you going to convince me that in this modern age of electric house appliances, microwave ovens and TV dinners, that sitting at home all day long watching reality TV and gossiping on the phone while the kids are at school, that she has contributed as much to the survival of the family as the man that worked all day long to pay the bills. I've mentioned in a past video that a woman's housework was actual work once upon a time, but not any longer, and practically all work outside the house was once upon a time physically brutal, but not anymore. While a lot of work is physically brutal, there are no shortage of equal or better paying jobs that require nothing more than knowledge and application of knowledge. If your claim that 9 months of pregnancy and however many hours of labor she goes into before delivering the child is a sacrifice she makes of herself to her husband, I would have to point out all the women who decide to go through with having a baby against the father's will. He doesn't want to be a dad, but she does want to be a mom. She goes through 9 months of carrying the child and however many hours in the delivery room, and does it all for herself. The very fact you think wives having sex with their husbands, or having babies, is a sacrifice she makes like the sacrifice her husband makes by working, shows that you're still in the Matrix, to borrow a Stardust metaphor. Now we'll move on to the sexual revolution.
I should point out that although periods of low fertility coincided with economic downturns, such as the Great Depression and the 1970s energy crisis, which are shown on this chart, the economic downturns could not have caused the declines in fertility because the declines in fertility significantly preceded the economic downturns. So it could be that the economic downturns and the fertility declines had a common cause, but the causation couldn't have gone in the direction from the economic situation to the fertility rate.
I hate to sound like a dick, but you're completely wrong about that. The fertility rate and the economy do in fact go hand in hand. In fact, that's exactly what the chart you've borrowed was demonstrating. I would show you evidence for this, but I'd have to use the exact chart you're using to demonstrate it, considering that was the original intended purpose of that chart. I'm just saying, the proof that you're wrong, is the actual chart you're displaying. As far as one preceding the other significantly, no, it's not significant. And you must also take into consideration there is bound to be a delay in official economic numbers, and how long it actually takes for people to react to a changing environment, plus the fact the employment opportunities and the official GDP and public debt index also have a delay, a bit like seeing the thunderclouds, hearing the thunder, feeling the wind blow, and having all these signs it's going to rain. You'll see people making decisions to pack up their things and get indoors before rain is officially hitting the ground. So again, there is seeing how tough it is to make a living, versus the actual numbers appearing as official data, due to the complexity of economics. And then you can also have the reverse. The economic numbers go south real fast, suddenly employment drops really fast with just a year or so delay, and it might take the public a few years to adjust their spending habits since they were used to living in a good economy of, by now, worry about it later. I'm just saying, the economy and the fertility rate in America does for the most part go hand in hand, and the proof is the very chart you're displaying, after reading the web page in Link4, which uses that exact chart. The major cause of fertility is attributed to the economy, with mention of other factors that go into effect like women delaying childbirth due to college and career on the like. It does mention this, but demonstrates economy is the overall biggest factor.
This chart shows the fertility rates for selected countries comparing 1960 to 2010. I chose these countries to illustrate the global pattern of fertility decline. They can be divided into two groups: those which were in 1960 developing or underdeveloped, and those that were part of the modern developed world in 1960. The underdeveloped or developing countries include Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, India, Brazil, and China. And in 1960, they all had fertility rates of over 5. The developed countries include Russia, Germany, Japan, the United States, and Canada. In 1960, they all had rates of below 4. And Japan's was just at replacement levels. By 2010, almost all of the underdeveloped or developing countries had gone through very dramatic declines in fertility. The only exception on this chart is Nigeria, and Nigeria is representative of sub-Saharan Africa, where the sexual revolution had very little impact. But in other parts of the world, it had a major impact. In Saudi Arabia, the fertility rate declined from over 7 children per woman to under 3.
In India, it declined from just under 6 to about 2.5. Brazil declined from over 6 to under 2. Currently, Brazil is below replacement. China declined significantly from over 5 children per woman to about 1.5. Now, part of that was due to the one-child policy, but a larger and more significant factor was the Cultural Revolution. So most of
Yes, the population of China was going down before the policy was implemented. There was already effort to lower population, or more accurately a removal of incentive to have as many children as possible. When it wasn't working fast enough, they implemented the one-child policy as something of an emergency. The massive population reduction in China in the late 50s is explained by high mortality rate. I don't know why there was such a high mortality rate, but it's there. The population explosion we see in the 1960s, the sexual revolution that theoretically should be killing the population according to you. That population spike coincides with the average life expectancy of 35 years of age to 66 years of age between 1949 and 1976. There was also Mao's encouragement that the Chinese breed in the highest numbers, and there were government-based incentives. Then the population got too high and so there became discouragement to having too many children, and we see the population going down. And we see the one-child per couple policy in 1979 taking shape, though the one-child policy really hasn't worked that well, and many people break the rules, but nonetheless, the busts and booms of population correlate to the desires of the government to both increase, then decrease, its population, coupled with a change in life expectancy. Link 2 is the wiki article on the one-child per couple policy and the population's history. Link 3 is the site in which the displayed chart comes from and also talks about China's population history. The data here basically proves that the rise and fall of the Chinese population has nothing to do with the sexual revolution or the breaking of traditional marriage. And India's population reduction coincides with population control measures as well. Link 4, another country on your list to be affected by the sexual revolution was Saudi Arabia. The sexual revolution capital of the world. Oh wait. The sexual revolution has had barely any cultural impact on Saudi Arabia, so that's 3 countries we can scratch off the list of examples.
So what happened in 1960? The simple answer is the birth control pill. It was adopted at that time in the United States as a form of contraception, and following that it spread to many other countries around the world. And obviously it had a major impact on fertility. But that is not the whole story. There was also a broader and more complex transformation of culture and society going on at that time, and one that had been going on for at least the entire 20th century, but really started to accelerate in 1960.
I am going to skip a lot of his video. He basically says that once upon a time we lived in a Malthusian world of population stagnation, high birth rate and high death rate. Then came better medicine to reduce infant death and increased life expectancy, better agriculture to decrease famines, and less tribal warfare, so this caused a population boom. Then came the sexual revolution in the 1960s, and that accounts for the major population reduction. The sexual revolution was basically the birth control pill, loosening of sexual morals and a breakdown of the traditional family of men working and women tending to the house and children. Then he moves on to this.
The modern human condition. Disabling your sexual organs is like putting a car up on blocks. The tires still spin, but they don't propel the car forward. Your desires don't exist to make you feel good. They exist to make you reproduce your genes. So your desires have evolved to make you move through life and ultimately reproduce your genes. But they don't do that by making you consciously want to reproduce your genes. They merely trigger certain responses to certain situations, which would, in a so-called natural environment, which is to say the environment that those desires evolved in, would have the consequence of reproducing your genes. So for example, why do people want sex but not children? Well, if people wanted children instead of sex, then they would kidnap children, or they would adopt children, or they would do something else rather than, getting pregnant and going through all the pains of labor and so on.
But people do adopt, steal children, go to sperm banks, use surrogate parents, have fertility treatments, and so on. I get that we have a sex drive to bond us together so that we pair off and mate. I get that the sexual instinct is a very primitive drive at the core of our existence. I know that animals mate most likely without an understanding of the consequence of their actions, and yes, there are people who want sex but aren't ready to be parents. But to suggest that all humans want is sex, and then we have spent our existence dealing with children as the unwanted consequence, and the only reason we haven't thrown the children away is once we hold it and look at it we bond to it. To suggest that people don't want babies is ridiculous. If you read about China's strict efforts to lower population, you will see no shortage of people breaking the rules in spite of moderate to massive consequences. Why? Because people want babies. China's and India's population problem. The government incentives and government backlashes and people's attitudes and defiance of these rules is a testament to the fact that people want children. I'm not saying our desire to be parents and to have a few kids is as intense as our immediate need to alleviate sexual frustration, but nonetheless, people want more than just sex, they want families. I think most men want to be fathers. Maybe they're not willing to settle down and be a dad at 19, but certainly they want to be dads. Finding a woman that isn't a complete greedy narcissistic basket case is difficult. Finding yourself in a financial situation to properly care for your child is difficult. The fact that as a man, the child will always be the property of its mother and can be taken away from you at any moment. These things act as powerful discouragement for males, and women want babies. I've noticed that when women are told they can't have children due to medical problems, it tends to fuck them up in the head a little bit. Just my personal observation. At any rate, I think women want babies a hell of a lot more than men, and men want babies. As I said, there are adoption agencies, fertility clinics, sperm banks, child abduction, and not just from pedos. The fact that sex is such a wonderful experience and powerful desire, just makes it the most convenient way of getting a baby.
Adapt or get the fuck out. The meme of non-reproduction is like a new virus spreading through human populations. Humanity will develop resistance to it. The genes and culture of people who choose to reproduce will replace the genes and culture of those who do not. This means that the world will become more African and less European. It will become more conservative and less liberal, because conservatives tend to have larger families. It will become more religious and less secular. Again, because religions tend to promote families and they are a stabilizing influence on memes. They help to stabilize traditional values and traditional behaviors. The world will also become more psychopathic and less socially responsible. There will be more deadbeat dads and welfare moms. The sexual revolution will not solve the problem of overpopulation. Overpopulation is a global problem, whereas choosing not to reproduce is an individual problem. You cannot solve a social problem at the individual level. The people who choose not to reproduce will simply be replaced by those who do choose to reproduce.
Aside from the prediction of certain racial types being the most common, everything else here is bullshit. I'm also guessing you've had a lot of black people commenting, so what if the future has lots of my people? What's wrong with that? You say it like it's a bad thing. Maybe you were just mentioning it matter-of-factly, or maybe you're one of these white guys that is concerned for the survival of his people, and that's fine. I understand it is natural that we identify as a member of a race, and that the notion our race can perish forever is a scary notion. It would be a shame for any race to perish, but that's not really my concern. Your idea that we will be more conservative, and religious, and psychopathic, this is nonsense. These are not genetic traits. Well, psychopath has a theoretical genetic cause, but there is no proof, only speculation and bullshit. Conservative parents can have liberal children. You can't breed liberals, feminists, MRAs, racial nationalists and so on. These are ideological conclusions based on environment, and school and media have far more effect than parents. And if school had an official religion, then even the trend of children taking after their parents' faith would be ruined by the school system. As for population, did you ever consider things like an incredibly high fertility could overpopulate a nation so badly that it becomes a detriment? So just breeding in the highest numbers isn't a guarantee of survival. It can make a nation so weak and so in debt to lesser populated nations that have more resources. You have to understand, with cultural changes happening in the blink of an eye, ever diminishing resources, wars and nuclear wars, fluctuating economies, the very real possibility of test tube babies, genetically engineered, that incredibly long-term predictions such as the ones you're making, are ridiculous. Women getting jobs won't cause human extinction. I also want to address some people's fears that if women get jobs, no one can raise the children. This is nonsense. And the proclamation that daycare will scramble the child's brain is also nonsense. The pseudoscience that shows children who attend daycare have X amount of problems is the same shoddy science that says feeding them fucking Cheerios will make them have better grades, and sending them to daycare will expose them to a variety of communal germs thus strengthen their immune system. There's simply no shortage of silly science proclaiming that the smallest little thing can determine the type of adult a child will become. You can improve a person's motor skills if you sleep in a certain position when pregnant, you can give them better communication skills by talking to your pregnant stomach, and turn them into musicians by playing music near their crib, and if you let them watch TV before the age of whatever, it causes ADHD. The list of bullshit coming from what passes as science these days is endless and sad. Plus, career women today have their children sat with by a babysitter 1 hour a week more than stay-at-home mums in 1975. Here's an excerpt from Link4 India, who studies time use surveys done by the Census Bureau and others, has concluded that contrary to popular belief, the broad movement of women into the paid labor force did not come at the expense of their children. Not only did fathers spend more time with children, but working mothers, she found, spent an average of 12 hours a week on childcare in 2003, an hour more than stay-at-home mothers did in 1975. That's actually very believable. In fact, I have noticed with female friends and relatives, that they hand off their children to others even less when they're working, because they have less time and ambition to go party or do whatever that requires them to stick the kid with someone. There seems to be this misconception that women stayed with their kids and their kids only, 24/7, and then they moved into the workplace and all the children suddenly became neglected. As that link shows, that simply isn't the case. It's up there with the notion that the thing we call traditionalism is the way it's been since the dawn of time, and that too is wrong. History is full of women acting as maids, barmaids, waitresses, teachers, tailors, merchants, farm hands, pottery makers, and gatherers that worked outside the home. Furthermore, the nuclear family model is also rather new. It was very common for multiple generations to live under the same roof, and let's not forget, marriage wasn't about love so much as it was a joining of two families, and these families often then shared their economic attributes. This is also why marriage contracts used to be very serious. If two families were to be merged and share resources, it couldn't just be severed by a brief lover's quarrel. Look at how common arranged marriages have been up until very recently. That which we often call traditional marriage is a rather new tradition in many aspects. Now let me move on to explore this idea that traditional marriage, defined by you as one man one woman, man works woman stays home, yields higher offspring. These statistics are, male to female employment per country comes from Trade Economics, Link 6, and are all from 2010. I need to point out that their website, the site is difficult to navigate and you can easily find yourself looking at the wrong thing. Instructions for best navigation is direct manipulation of the URL. Instructions in the description. The fertility rate per country comes from World Bank, Link 7, and is for the year 2012. Canada's fertility is 1.6. Canada's employment is 57.4% female and 65.3% male. That means there is only 7.9% more men working than women. I should point out that I am assuming the percentage of married women and single women holding jobs is even. Yes, I realize that is a dangerous and untested assumption. Now we'll compare this to a strong traditional patriarchal society like Iran. Iran's fertility is 1.6. Iran's employment is 13.5% female and 65.4% male. That's a 51.9% differential. And again, assuming that female employment is the same for both single and married women, that means 44% more traditional marriage. 44% more traditional marriage, in a place that can't possibly be more sexual revolution than America and Canada, and yet same fertility rate. Now let's compare this to Nigeria, that you said was barely affected by the sexual revolution and has far more traditional marriage and thus much higher fertility. Nigeria's fertility is 5.5. Nigeria's female employment is 30% and 34.8% male. That's a 4.8% difference, and compared to Canada that means there is theoretically 3.8% more traditional marriage. But 3.8% more traditional marriage cannot possibly explain a 243.75% fertility difference. Again, using male to female employment ratios to determine how many wives hold employment, to disqualify traditional marriage, isn't a foolproof method since it does not take into consideration how many of the employed women are single versus married. But you claimed that Nigeria had more traditional marriage than Canada, or maybe it was United States. Either way, how were you coming to that conclusion? I may have used a less than flawless method, but at least I didn't just make an assumption, and I am going to assume you made that assumption. Most people think Africa is a nation, rather than continent, and everyone is black, lives in the jungle, is naked, and sits around all day making clicking sounds at each other with flies crawling over their face. People just love whipping out baseless assumptions about life on that continent. Many women in Africa work, and actually always have. Granted, the amount of what we consider employment has gone up in the past 40 years due to a lot more industrialization, and the ratio of women holding that employment has gone up in the past 10 to 15 years, and here's where I am going to infuriate a lot of people in my audience, but certain feminist organizations have actually been instrumental in making that happen, and it actually has shown to boost the economy in some parts of Africa. I know, I hate giving positive credit to anything feminist, but if I just closed my eyes and pretend that no feminist organization has ever done anyone any good ever, I'd be as guilty as your average third-wave feminist that sticks their fingers in their ears and shouts bigot 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 when MRAs try to explain their side of things. At any rate, according to not only these statistics, but various other research I have done, I see no correlation to fertility and women working outside the home. The only pattern, and it's not a clear pattern, that I see from what studying I've done, is that incredibly poor nations with no industry tend to have high fertility, nations that have industry tend to have lower fertility, nations that have good industry experience a sharp fertility drop during economic recessions, and sharp fertility spikes in economic booms, but overall good economies produce lower fertility by comparison to less industrialized nations. Also, I have discovered a strong correlation with strong economies and the amount of women that work. However, judging an economy as good is normally just a matter of measuring its GDP. Granted, that's not a picture-perfect way of measuring the economy, but it does give a reasonable first-glance assessment, and I wanted to make sure that the male and the female employment rates, and the different countries they occur in, all came from the exact same source that had no bias. I wanted to avoid pulling a rein and choosing the highest possible numbers from one source, choosing the lowest possible numbers from a completely different source to inflate or deflate something to push an agenda. Many countries, not just the ones I've shown, gave me similar results, that female employment does not actually lower fertility, and I confess, I actually find that hard to believe. I originally assumed it would have some effect, but what I was consistently seeing was either no noticeable difference or very often the opposite, that higher female employment coincided with higher birth rates, and fuck if I can explain that, except maybe the correlation of better economy, or more accurately economic booms in an already industrialized world, inspire higher fertility rates, and women leaving the home and working has shown to boost GDP, so maybe that's the cause and effect I am seeing. Women get jobs, economy goes up as a result, and fertility climbs higher when people can actually afford to start having more kids. But at least this was an opportunity for me to learn something I never knew. Women leaving the home and taking up employment tends to cause strong immediate economic growth, at least by GDP. But let's take this opportunity to summarize what we've learned. 1. Men and women as a society or class can oppress the other. 2. The sexual contract does not benefit men as much as women. 3. Your graph showing that the sexual revolution, and by extension the breakdown of traditionalism, does not correlate with the fertility declines as much as population control measures and economic changes. 4. That which we call traditionalism isn't that old of a tradition. 5. Ideologies will not perish as a result of lowered fertility since ideologies are dropped, modified, and adopted, like baseball cards and fashion trends. 6. People do want children, thus condoms and birth control pills will not circumvent nature so much as to lead to extinction. 7. I really hate doing videos that involve me doing independent statistics, but at least I don't copy and paste other people's sloppy pre-compiled statistics and call what I did research. Not that I am accusing you of that, I'm just putting it out there to all the pseudo-intellectuals that do. 8. A bad idea like feminism can accidentally do some good to some people sometimes. It's up though with broken clocks being right and stuff. 9. Looking at declining European fertility rates will give a white guy the same feeling black people used to get when watching old TV shows about the future starring no black people.